What is up, YouTube? It is Gregory Dearth. It is I, Gregory Dearth. I am the Atheist Guard, and I'm going to be going through the Ontological Argument today. Now, I've watched many people debate this argument and refute it. I understand there's a problem in Axiom S5. I don't know exactly what that is. So I'm going to approach this from a unique perspective where I'm going in there unprepared. I haven't looked up the refutations. I don't understand the refutations necessarily. I just know it's been refuted. But I don't know what the specifics are regarding those refutations. So this is kind of I think it's a more honest approach to these types of issues where it's a complex argument. I want to actually pit my brain against it. I don't want to, rely on someone else's analysis or what the mainstream philosophers have to say about it. And this is one of the tougher arguments. It's a lot tougher than anything I've covered so far because it's a little bit deeper. A lot of these things that I've covered so far are just basic level, why I'm an atheist, why I don't believe, that kind of thing. So let's get this thing started here. It took a while to download. It's a nice looking video. I give him credit for presentation.
In the year 1078, a monk named Anselm of Canterbury astonished the world by arguing that if it is even possible that God exists, then it follows logically that God does exist.
So that's the basic concept behind ontological arguments. It's going off of a possibility, and it's question begging ultimately, because it's like, why would you think it's possible that a God exists? You have a demonstrated possibility to even go forward with the argument.
Anselm's argument came to be called the Ontological Argument, and it has sharply divided philosophers ever since. The 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer called it a charming joke, but many prominent 20th century philosophers, such as Charles Hartshorne, Norman Malcolm, and Alvin Plantinga, think that it's sound. Here it is. God can be defined as a maximally great being. If something were greater than God, then that being would be God. And in order to be maximally great, a maximally great being would have to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world.
Why? Couldn't they be all-powerful, all-knowing, and the most evil being possible in every possible world? Wouldn't that make them great as well? Why is morally perfect part of that? Plus, you're defining into existence a God that you want to demonstrate exists. So there's already sort of this circular thing going on, which is the question begging that I think is the real central problem with the ontological arguments. In every possible world, see, that's another part of it. What's a possible world? There's only one world that I know of, that this would pertain to. And world by world, I mean universe, basically. And I think that's what they're referring to here. They're not referring to the planet. They're referring to in every possible universe. I don't know. Let's see.
Possible worlds are simply ways the world could have been. To say that something exists in a possible world is just to say that if the world were that way, then the thing would have existed.
Well, I stand corrected. They are talking about the planet, I think. Like a pink elephant, flying pigs, a sentient rabbit. Yeah, but possibility has to be demonstrated. You can't just assert possibility. Impossibility is a claim, and possibility is a claim. You can't just assert that it's possible just because you can imagine it.
For example, even though unicorns don't exist in the actual world, it seems at least possible that they could have. So we can say that unicorns exist in some possible world.
No, you can say it's possible. You can't say it's possible that they exist at all. And you can't say they exist in some possible world because you don't have a possible world. It's just a thought experiment. It's not like it's an actual thing. So you're comparing the actual world with an abstract notion of reality.
On the other hand, a married bachelor does not exist in any possible world
It's because it's a contradiction in terms.
because the idea of a married bachelor is logically incoherent. It could not possibly exist. So if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then we can say that he exists in some possible world.
He exists in some possible world. Well, that doesn't even mean anything. What does it mean to say something exists in a possible world? What possible world? What world are they thinking is possible? How do they demonstrate that there's a possible world where a God exists?
But wait, a maximally great being would not really be maximally great if it existed in only some possible worlds. To be maximally great, it has to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world. So think about it. If a maximally great being exists in any possible world, then it exists in every possible world. And if it exists in every possible world, then it exists in the actual world.
The actual world is not in the set of possible worlds. Or rather, possible worlds are not in the set of the actual. It's just a possibility. A possibility can still not exist. If something is possible, it doesn't necessarily mean it can be real. So you can't put possible worlds in the set of actual things. And they're showing actual as a part of the possible. Well, of course, actual is possible because it's here. We experience the actual world. We know it is possible. Its possibility is moot because it actually exists. But these possible worlds where they think this God exists are just mental constructs. They're abstract notions. They're not anything that's been demonstrated. So this is like mental masturbation to the nth degree.
That is, a maximally great being actually exists.
Thus, the atheist.
No. If that means anything, a maximally great being exists, how do you know it's a God? Why couldn't it just be better than us? Maybe we're the second greatest being that exists, and there's a greater being than us. And they're like, well, if you could imagine something greater than that being, then that would be God. Well, yeah, that would be a God, but a being that's greater than us wouldn't necessarily have to be a God. And a maximally great being could be us. We could be the the best it's ever going to get as far as conscious and our ability to understand the universe. We may be the best form of sentience in this universe. Who knows? Nobody knows that. So there may not be a maximally great being better than us.
The atheist has to maintain not simply that God does not exist, but that it is impossible that God exists.
No. We have to maintain that there's no evidence to show that a God does exist. Not that it's impossible for a God to exist. That's a claim that would have to be demonstrated.
Here's a summary of the ontological argument. Steps 2 through 6 are straightforward and largely uncontroversial.
Really? It's possible that a maximally great being exists. No, you haven't demonstrated that. Your argument, that's a conclusion to an argument. That's not a premise. If you could come up with an argument that shows that it's possible that a maximally great being exists, you'd be doing something pretty good. You'd be doing a lot more than what this argument tries to do. It's defining that it's just asserting it as a brute fact that it's possible that a maximally great being exists. We don't know that. We don't know that. I mean, and we don't know what this maximally great being would be as far as attributes. And it says a maximally great being exists in some possible world. Yeah, that could be us in this world. If a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then it exists in every possible world. No, not necessarily. It could be possible and still not be real. I mean, it's possible that there's a unicorn. Doesn't make it real. A unicorn could be the maximally great horse. Does that mean unicorns actually exist? Because if it didn't exist in all possible worlds, it wouldn't be maximal, and therefore, since it exists in all possible worlds, a unicorn has to exist in the actual world. Doesn't his ontological argument prove that there are unicorns?
But what about point number 1?
Yeah, what about it?
Clearly, if it can be shown that the idea of a god is logically incoherent, then the argument fails.
And I would assert that anything that exists as an entity with thoughts outside of space and time is pretty incoherent.
But is the idea of a maximally great being absurd? Like a married...
No, it's not absurd. It's just an assertion. Just like a maximally great horse is not absurd. But his argument, if it works, demonstrates that unicorns exist because they're the maximally great horse. Dragons exist because they're the maximally great reptile or whatever, using reptile colloquially. Maximally great eagles exist, whatever.
Like a married bachelor, or a square circle, or the smell of blue? This doesn't seem to be the case. The notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being that exists in every possible world seems to be a perfectly coherent idea.
Idea is the key word there. That doesn't make it real.
But couldn't we parody this argument and make it work for anything? Why not say, it's logically possible that a maximally great pizza exists. Therefore, a maximally great pizza does exist? However, the idea of a maximally great pizza is not like the idea of a maximally great being.
Why? In fact, a maximally great pizza does exist. Somewhere on this planet is the best pizza that you will ever eat. I mean, it might be a subjective thing to people to consider what a great flavor is, but it's possible for me to imagine a pizza that's so good that anybody who's ever eaten pizza will concede that this is the best pizza they've ever had. So that actually can exist because we have examples of pizzas. We don't have examples of disembodied minds to say that there's a maximally great disembodied mind, or that a being can exist without a mind that doesn't have a brain. We don't have any examples of that. So we can't actually say that that's possible. We can't say a maximally great pizza is possible because we know you can make pizza and someone out there has to be the best.
In the first place, there aren't intrinsic maximal values that make pizzas great. There could always be one more pepperoni to increase its greatness. It's not even obvious what properties make a pizza great. Thin crust or thick crust, extra cheese, anchovies? It's relative to the taste of the consumer.
Right.
In the second place, a maximally great pizza would have to exist in every logical possible world.
Right.
But that would mean that it couldn't be eaten. So it wouldn't really be a pizza.
It wouldn't really be a god.
Because a pizza is something you can eat. The idea of a maximally great pizza turns out not to be a coherent idea.
Let's run back through that analogy. So because it's possible, you can't actually eat it, so it's not real. So this whole thing that he went through with God existing in all possible worlds, those gods aren't real. Because it's all conceptual. It's all just a flat assertion, a exercise in your brain power. That's all it is.
The idea of God, on the other hand, is an intuitively coherent idea. Therefore, his existence is a possibility.
No, his existence isn't a possibility until it's been demonstrated to be a possibility.
The ontological argument shows that if God possibly exists, then God actually exists.
Reasonable faith with William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig, the guy that appeals to metaphysical intuition as his foundation in his transcendental argument. I'll go through a lot of this stuff later, but yeah, that didn't convince me. It's unconvincing. It's not a good argument. It's just a conceptual thing that some people who already believe might think works because they already believe. They're like, oh, that's clever. But I like the very start of this video when that dude was basically, yeah, it's a funny joke, you know, amusing. It is. It's really amusing. His rejection for the pizza analogy relies on a subjectivity of taste. Notice he didn't use the unicorn in this part. A unicorn would be a maximally great horse, perfect in every capacity. It's the fastest horse, the most beautiful horse. It's the whitest horse. It's the horse with a horn. It's a horse that knows everything. It's a horse that can detect virgins, whatever. You give it all these attributes that no other horse can possibly have, this maximal greatness. And his maximal greatness features for his God are entirely subjective too, as I explained at the very, very beginning of this, that being, perfectly moral is a maximal, just as much as being perfectly evil is a maximum. I mean, it's really just incoherent in my opinion, and that's why most philosophers laugh this stuff off, and only people that really push this crap are the apologists that already believe in it, like Dr. William Lane Craig. Is he a doctor? I think he's a doctor, unlike Ken Hovind. All right. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'm going to get this edited and put up real quick, and have a good day.